A billionaire humiliated Dean Martin's daughter. What Dean did. Next, made him beg for mercy. The night it happened, Dean Martin wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't on the bill. His name wasn't on the marquee. It was just another high-roller night at one of the Strip's most exclusive casinos in the late 1960s, the kind of place where millionaires came to play and billionaires came to be gods. Dean had finished his own show across town an hour earlier. His tuxedo jacket was slung over his shoulder, his bow tie loosened the way the world loved to see him, relaxed, easy, a drink in his hand and a song never too far from his lips. But tonight, Dean Martin wasn't there to perform. He was there for his daughter. Her name was Gina, the youngest of his children. To the public, Dean was the king of cool. To her, he was just Dad, the man who made the darkest rooms feel warm with a joke and a smile. Gina had been invited to sing a song at a private high-roller event, a little favor from the casino owner who loved Dean and adored his family. It wasn't a big show. No newspaper review, no posters. Just a tasteful dinner, a small stage, a live band, a few industry folks, a few familiar Rat Pack faces, and a front row full of money. The most important piece of that money had a name no one said too loudly. Charles "Charlie" Langford. He wasn't old Vegas mob. He was the new kind of power: Wall Street money, international investments, shipping, oil, casinos. People called him a billionaire even back then, when the word still meant you were practically royalty. He'd bought into several Vegas properties, threw money around like it was water. Staff treated him like a king, not because they liked him, but because if he decided he didn't like them, they might find themselves out of a job by morning. He believed three things. Money could buy anything. Everyone had a price. No one ever told him no. That night, all three beliefs would be tested by the last man on earth he should have crossed. "That's Dean's girl." Inside the private showroom, the lights were low and the air was thick with cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. Waiters glided like ghosts between tables, balancing silver trays topped with champagne. At a center table sat a small group, a casino executive, his wife, a couple of producers, and Dean Martin, with Gina on his right. Gina was nervous, though she tried not to show it. "Dad, what if I mess up the lyrics?" she whispered. Dean took a sip of his drink, then leaned in and smiled. "Baby, you could sing the phone book, and they'd still give you a standing ovation," he said. "Besides, if you mess up, I'll blame the band." She laughed, tension breaking for a moment. On the other side of the room, people started to notice. "Is that Dean? Dean's here tonight? Look, it's his daughter. She's going to sing." At the front row center table sat Charles Langford, late 50s, tall, with a head of perfectly combed silver hair and a suit that cost more than most people's cars. Around him were his entourage, lawyers, assistants, a couple of women draped in jewelry and boredom. He heard the whispers. Dean Martin. He turned, glanced casually, and smirked. "Get me another drink," he snapped at a waiter without looking. The invitation. A few minutes later, the casino's entertainment director walked up to Dean's table. "Dean, thanks again for coming," he said, practically glowing with gratitude. "Everyone's thrilled you're here. Gina, we'll have you up right after dessert, all right?" Gina nodded. "Thank you, I'm excited." The director leaned closer. "And Dean, we've got Mr. Langford here tonight." He tilted his head subtly toward the billionaire. "Big money, important man. He's particular. So if anything seems off, just know we're doing our best to keep him happy." Dean didn't look. He just lifted his glass slightly. "Far be it from me to get between a man and his ego," Dean said lightly. The director laughed a little too loud and scurried away. Dean watched him go, the ghost of a frown touching his lips. It disappeared a moment later when Gina squeezed his arm. "Dad, stop making faces," she teased. "I'm not making faces," Dean replied. "This is my face. I just loan it to people now and then." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. That was all Dean cared about, the billionaire's game. Charles Langford didn't just sit and watch shows. He watched people. He watched the way staff bent a little lower at his table. He watched the way the casino manager checked on him personally. He watched the way other millionaires glanced over, gauging his mood. And now he watched Dean Martin's daughter. He hadn't known she'd be there tonight. Honestly, he didn't care about Dean Martin, beyond the fact the man could fill a showroom and keep his investments profitable. But a legend's daughter? That was a different kind of power. That was something he could use. Langford had a habit. He liked taking people who thought they were special and proving they weren't. To him, humility wasn't a virtue. It was a weapon. He leaned toward the woman on his left, a bored blonde in a dress that sparkled under the lights. "That's Dean Martin's girl," he said. "They say she wants to make it on her own, wants to prove she's not just his daughter." The woman shrugged. "Lots of girls want that." "Yes," he said softly, "but only a few get to learn how the world really works." "Ladies and gentlemen." The band struck up a light instrumental. The casino's entertainment director walked on stage, smiling wide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice booming through the speakers, "tonight you're in for a very special treat. Please welcome a young lady with a voice as beautiful as her last name is legendary, Dean Martin's daughter, Gina Martin." Applause rippled through the room. More for the last name than anything else, but it was genuine. Dean clapped too, giving a little whistle. "That's my girl," he called out, just loud enough to make her blush as she walked to the stage. Gina stepped up to the microphone. The band started the soft intro of a classic standard, something in the family's blood. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to sing. Her voice wasn't her father's. It wasn't trying to be. It was softer, sweeter, less whiskey, more sunlight. There was a warmth in it that wrapped around the room, and for a moment, even the casino's jaded high rollers forgot about their chips and their egos. At Dean's table, a few old friends watched, impressed. "She's good, Dino," one of them murmured. Dean's eyes never left the stage. "I know." In the front row, Charles Langford watched too. He saw a young woman, mid-20s, in a simple but elegant dress, singing with more heart than polish. He saw the way the room leaned in. He saw the way Dean watched her, not as a star, but as a father. And somewhere in the dark corners of his mind, a twisted idea formed. Money could buy anything: respect, fear, even dignity. Why not take it from the one man in the room people said couldn't be touched? The humiliation. Gina finished her first song to warm applause. She smiled, a little breathless, and nodded to the band as they segued into the next number. Halfway through her second song, it started. At first, it was just a sound, a short, sharp clap, offbeat, jarring, then another, then a laugh. Gina faltered for half a beat, eyes flickering toward the sound. In the front row, Charles Langford was clapping deliberately, mockingly, right in the middle of her verse. "So pretty," he called out, voice raised enough to cut through the music. "Sing something you actually know, sweetheart." A low murmur rippled through the audience. The band played on. Professionals. But the smallest crack of confusion appeared in their eyes. Gina tried to continue, but her voice wavered. She'd sung in front of people before. She'd dealt with nerves. But this was different. This wasn't a drunken heckler in the back row. This was the man everyone had been told to keep happy. Langford kept going. "Hey," he shouted, lifting his glass. "How much of this do we have to sit through before we get the real act? We paid good money for tonight, not for Daddy's little girl's recital." A few people laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were scared not to. Humiliation is a contagious disease. One cruel voice can turn a room. Dean Martin's daughter stood on stage, under the hot lights of a Vegas showroom, suddenly feeling very small. Her throat tightened. The lyrics slipped from her mind. The band, sensing something was wrong, softened, then trailed off. Silence fell over the room. Gina stared out at the dark shapes and glittering eyes, frozen in the beam of the spotlight. Her heart hammered. She could feel tears burning behind her eyes. At his table, Dean hadn't moved. He hadn't stood up. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't even set down his drink. But his eyes were no longer soft. They were ice. "Sit down, Dino." The entertainment director, pale as paper, rushed toward the stage, ready to rescue the situation, to say something, anything, to smooth things over for their billionaire guest. He didn't make it. Dean Martin was already rising from his chair. His friend next to him reached out. "Dino, don't—" Dean gently moved his hand away. "Sit down, pal," Dean said calmly. "You don't want to stand up in the middle of this part." He adjusted his tie. It was already perfect. Took one last sip of his drink, set the glass down, and began walking toward the stage. All across the room, people turned. "Dean's going up there." "Oh, no. What's he going to do?" Even the band, still half on their feet, watched him approach as if he were some calm storm rolling in. On stage, Gina saw him and shook her head slightly. "Dad, it's okay," she whispered into the dead microphone, voice not carrying. Dean smiled up at her, the same way he had when she'd been 5 and scared of a thunderstorm. "Don't worry, baby," he murmured. "It's just me." He stepped onto the stage, took the microphone gently from her hands, and turned to face the crowd. If you'd never seen Dean Martin perform before, you'd think this was just another part of the show. But for those who knew him, who'd seen him in back rooms, in dressing rooms, at small tables in big casinos, there was something different tonight. The twinkle was gone from his eyes, the cool was still there, but underneath it there was steel. Dean takes the room. "Folks," Dean said, voice smooth as ever, "I hope you're enjoying the evening." A polite wave of applause washed through the room. People were grateful for something to do with their hands. Dean nodded. "Good, good. I'd hate to think anyone wasn't having a wonderful time, especially someone in the front row." He didn't look at Langford, not yet. Instead, he turned slightly toward Gina. "Now, this beautiful young lady here, she didn't ask to be Dean Martin's daughter." He smiled softly. That was her first mistake. A few people chuckled nervously. "She didn't ask to come up here and perform for a room full of strangers and very important wallets. That was her second mistake." The chuckles grew again. He paced it perfectly. "But she did come up here. She did sing, and she did something a lot of tough guys in this town never do." He paused. "She tried." The room quieted. The laughter faded. Dean turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and finally looked straight at Charles Langford. Their eyes met. Langford held his gaze, chin tilted, a small, amused smile on his lips. He was used to people backing down once they realized who they were dealing with. Dean Martin wasn't most people. The call-out. "Now," Dean said, voice still light, "I hear we've got a very special guest tonight, a man of great importance, a man of extraordinary wealth." He let the word hang in the air like a bad smell. "A man so powerful," Dean continued, "that he can come into another man's town, another man's home, and insult his daughter in front of a room full of people, and not one of them will say a word." The silence was absolute. The casino manager, standing near the back, felt sweat running down his spine. His entire career balanced on the razor's edge of the next 30 seconds. Dean motioned casually toward the front row. "Mr. Langford, isn't it?" he said. Every head in the room turned toward the billionaire. Langford smiled tightly. "That's right," he said, "and I—" Dean raised a hand. "Dean." No, he interrupted gently. "You had your chance to talk, pal. You yelled right over a young girl trying to sing, right over musicians doing their job. You used your money to buy yourself a front row seat, and you decided that made you the star of the show." He stepped down from the tiny riser on stage and walked to the very edge, directly above Langford's table. Langford shifted slightly in his chair, still smiling, but something moved in his eyes, a flicker of annoyance, of danger. "Careful, Martin," he said softly. "You don't know who you're talking to." Dean leaned down, bringing the microphone closer, his voice dropping just enough to feel intimate and terrifying at the same time. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm talking to," he said. "I'm talking to a man who's got more money than manners. I'm talking to a man who thinks a bank account makes him better than the people around him. I'm talking to a man who's about to learn something they don't teach in whatever fancy little boardrooms you come from." He straightened, turning his head just enough so the whole room was included again. "See, in this town, people like him think they own the place. They buy a piece of a casino, and suddenly they think they bought the dignity of everyone inside it. There was a subtle shift in the crowd. The staff, waiters, dealers, doormen in the back, stood a little straighter. No one had ever said it out loud before. Dean continued, "But there's something money can't buy, something no contract, no stock, no deed can put in your name." He pointed the microphone down at Langford. "Money can't buy you class." A low murmur rippled through the room, growing into something like applause, hesitant at first, then bolder as people realized they were part of something bigger than one man's ego. Langford's smile vanished. His jaw tightened. "That's a cute speech," he said. "But you're forgetting something, Martin. I own a piece of this town, and I don't like being embarrassed." Dean's eyes hardened, but his smile remained. "Oh, I'm not done embarrassing you yet," he said. "I'm just getting warmed up." Turning the knife, Dean stepped back onto the stage, microphone in hand, the full weight of the room's attention following him. "You know what the funny thing is?" he said. "Guys like Mr. Langford here, they always think they're the most powerful man in the room." He paced slowly across the stage. "They wave around their checkbooks, they buy out half a casino, they fire a few poor bastards who looked at them the wrong way, and they start to think that fear is the same thing as respect." He stopped. "It's not." He pointed at the band. "Fellas, hit me something light." The pianist, sensing the current, started a soft, jazzy vamp underneath Dean's words. It gave the moment rhythm, like a heartbeat. Dean nodded, speaking over the music. "Let me tell you all a little secret," he said. "This town wasn't built by men like him. It was built by waiters who smiled through 12-hour shifts, by musicians who played until their fingers bled, by dancers who kept going long after their feet gave out, by bartenders, bellhops, dealers, and, yeah, by a couple of guys with guns in dark corners." Nervous laughter scattered, but no one dared interrupt fully. "But it was kept alive by something else," Dean said. "By a simple rule, you don't humiliate people who are trying. You don't spit on the little guy just because you're sitting on a taller chair." He shifted his gaze back to Langford. "Now, I'm not the toughest guy in this town. I'm not the richest. I'm just a singer who tells a few jokes and tries not to fall off the stage." A wave of soft laughter, genuine this time. "But there's one thing I won't let slide. Not for any amount of money in the world." His voice dropped. "You don't get to humiliate my daughter." The room held its breath. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Even the slot machines out in the casino seemed to fall quieter. Dean raised the microphone again, eyes never leaving Langford. "So, here's what we're gonna do," he said. "Since you wanted to be the star of the show tonight, Mr. Langford, I'm going to give you a chance to earn it." He extended his free hand toward Gina, who had been standing quietly at the side of the stage, eyes wide, tears unshed. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "come here." She walked to him, every step feeling like an eternity. Dean put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close to his side, turning her toward the crowd. "This is my daughter," he said. "Her name is Gina. She has more heart, more courage, and more class in one song than you could buy in 100 lifetimes." Then, to the billionaire, "Now, if you're half the man your bank balance says you are, you're going to stand up, you're going to walk to this stage, and you're going to apologize to her, in front of everyone you tried to impress by tearing her down." The billionaire's choice. It was a direct challenge. No jokes, no wiggle room. Across the room, casino executives silently begged Langford with their eyes. "Let it go. Laugh it off. Don't make this worse." But men like Charles Langford weren't used to backing down. His face darkened, anger rising up like steam. "Or what?" he said. "What are you gonna do, Martin? Sing me to death?" A few people tittered nervously. Reflex laughter, not real. Dean considered him for a long moment. "Or nothing," he said finally. The answer surprised everyone, including Langford. "I'm not going to hit you. I'm not going to have you thrown out. I'm not going to call in any favors from friends who, let's just say, don't work 9 to 5, Dean continued. He paced a step. "I'm just going to tell you what's already happening." He pointed the microphone gently toward the audience. "Take a good look around, Mr. Langford," he said. "These people, the ones whose respect you think you can buy, they're all watching you. Not your money, not your clothes, you." Langford's eyes flickered around the room despite himself. Dean pressed on. "They're watching to see what kind of man you really are. Do you double down on cruelty? Do you prove that you're just a bully with a bigger wallet, or—" He paused. "Do you do the one thing real men know how to do when they've gone too far?" He let the question hang. "Do you admit you were wrong?" The words were simple, but in that room, they were heavier than any threat. Langford could feel it, the shift in the air, the subtle turning of the tide. For the first time in a very long time, his money didn't make him the center of gravity. Dean Martin did. The King of Cool wasn't just controlling a crowd, he was controlling the story they would tell about this night for the rest of their lives. If Langford stood up and raged, stormed out, demanded firings, flexed his power, every person in that room would eventually tell the same story. He tried to crush a girl and couldn't even stand up to her father's eyes. Slowly, painfully, Charles Langford pushed back his chair. Begging for mercy, he stood. The room murmured. He adjusted his jacket, his jaw tight. Every instinct in him screamed to walk out, to slam a door, to make a phone call that would cost people their livelihoods, but something else held him in place. Fear? Maybe. But not the kind he was used to causing in others. This was the fear of becoming small. Not in his bank account, but in the only place that ever really matters. Other people's memories. He walked slowly to the stage. Dean didn't move to meet him. He stood with his arm around Gina, watching. Langford reached the steps, climbed them, and stood a few feet away from them, under the same spotlight he'd tried to steal with his mockery. Up close, he looked older, smaller. The armor of arrogance cracked just enough to show the tired, angry man beneath. Dean held out the microphone. Langford stared at it, then at Gina. For a second, he hesitated. Then he took the mic. His voice, when it came, wasn't smooth and commanding. It was rough, strained. He began, then stopped, swallowing hard. He forced the words out like they burned. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." He turned slightly toward the audience, a billionaire addressing a room not from a podium or a boardroom, but from a place of exposed, reluctant humanity. "I had too much to drink," he said. "I thought I was being funny. I wasn't. It was rude. I apologize." He turned back to Gina. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Gina's throat tightened. She'd expected anger. She'd expected her father's defense. She had not expected to see one of the most powerful men in the room looking at her like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Dean watched him for a moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He took back the microphone, stepped closer, and spoke softly enough that it felt like the room was intruding on a private talk. "Now," Dean said, "you're apologizing for the right thing, but not in the right way." Langford frowned. "What do you—" "You embarrassed her in front of everyone," Dean said. "So you're not just going to say sorry, you're going to ask her for something." He looked at Gina. "Baby, this man tried to take away your dignity. The only way he gets it back is if you give it to him." He handed her the microphone. The power shifted unmistakably. A billionaire, a legend, an entire room full of eyes, waiting on the words of a young woman who, 10 minutes ago, felt like she didn't belong on that stage. Gina looked at her father. He nodded once. She took a breath. "Mr. Langford," she said, voice trembling only slightly, "do you know what hurt the most?" He didn't answer. "It wasn't the words," she continued. "I've heard worse. Anyone who performs has. It was the fact that everyone let you say them." She glanced over the audience, the tables that had laughed, the faces that had looked away. No one stopped you. No one told you to be quiet. Because you're rich. Because they were scared. A hush dropped like a curtain. She turned back to him. "You wanted me to feel small," she said. You wanted to show that my father's name couldn't protect me, that your money mattered more than my voice." Her hand tightened on the microphone. "I'm not going to humiliate you back. That's not who I am. That's not who he raised me to be." She motioned gently toward Dean. "But I am going to ask you for something." Langford swallowed. "What?" he croaked. "I want you to ask me," she said, "to forgive you." The words hung between them like a dare and a prayer all at once. Langford's face flushed. For a man like him, this was more painful than any physical blow, but trapped under the weight of 100 silent witnesses, under the unblinking gaze of Dean Martin and the quiet strength of his daughter, he broke. "Will you forgive me?" he asked, voice barely audible. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "if you sit down and you listen. Really listen." She lifted her chin. "To the rest of my song." The real applause. Without another word, Charles Langford handed back the microphone and walked slowly down the steps. He returned to his table, not like a conqueror, but like a man who just survived a trial. He sat. No one made a joke, no one clapped him on the back. His entourage avoided his eyes. On stage, Dean turned to his daughter. "You okay, baby?" he murmured. She nodded, though tears brimmed at the corners of her eyes. He kissed her forehead. Then he turned to the band. "From the top, fellas," he said. "And this time, no interruptions." The band leader nodded, relief and admiration mixing on his features. He counted them in. The same song began again. But this time, it was different. Gina closed her eyes and started to sing. Her voice was steadier, stronger. Something inside her had shifted. She wasn't singing as Dean Martin's daughter trying to prove she belonged. She was singing as herself, for every person who'd ever stood under bright lights feeling small because someone bigger decided that was fun. The room leaned in. When she finished, the silence lasted a split second too long, and then the applause crashed over her like a wave. People stood, not just because she had a famous last name, not just because they were relieved the tension had broken. They were standing because they'd just watched something rare, a young woman humiliated by power. Stand taller than it. A father use his fame not to crush, but to correct. And a man who thought he owned the room beg for mercy from the one person he'd tried to break. Aftermath. The story spreads. Stories travel fast in Vegas. By the next morning, every lounge singer, pit boss, dealer, and showgirl had some version of the tale. Dean made a billionaire get on his knees. He threatened to have the guy whacked. No, he slapped him across the face on stage. None of that was true. The truth was quieter, more powerful. Dean Martin didn't throw a punch. He didn't shout. He didn't call in favors from old friends with darker histories. He did something much more dangerous. He held up a mirror. He made a billionaire see himself through other people's eyes, through the eyes of the girl he'd humiliated, through the eyes of the staff he'd treated like furniture, through the eyes of a room that suddenly remembered that money isn't the only kind of power. In the weeks that followed, something changed in that casino. Staff noticed that Charles Langford, when he visited, was quieter, less cruel. He still complained, still demanded. Old habits die hard. But he never interrupted another performer, never mocked another singer on stage. And when Gina's name occasionally appeared in smaller print on a poster under her father's, featuring a special appearance by Gina Martin, he never once attended those performances. Vegas has a long memory. The mob had its ways of teaching lessons. So did the money men. But that night, everyone learned there was another kind of lesson entirely, the kind delivered by a father who refused to let his daughter face humiliation alone. The man behind the cool people always said Dean Martin was the king of cool because he never seemed to care. The drink in his hand, the lazy grin, the slouch against the piano, it all said, "Nothing bothers me." But that night proved something else. His cool wasn't indifference. It was control of himself, of his temper, of the room, of the story. He could have exploded. He could have turned that showroom into a battleground of egos. He could have stormed off, taken his daughter away, and left the billionaire to gloat. Instead, he did something infinitely more effective. He made the man who humiliated his daughter see it, and then ask her for mercy. That's a different kind of strength, not the strength of fists or guns or bank accounts, the strength of a man who knows exactly who he is and exactly what he will not tolerate. In the end, that's why the story survived, long after the casino changed hands, long after the neon lights were replaced, long after the old Vegas gave way to the new. Because it wasn't just about Dean Martin or his daughter or a billionaire with more money than sense. It was about this. Power means nothing if you use it to make people smaller. Respect means everything when you use it to make them stand taller. And on that night, in that room, under those lights, Dean Martin reminded everyone which one really matters.